The frost wasn't just under his boots, it was the whole world, breathed out and frozen solid. Every step towards the stable was a crackle of protest, the sound of breaking something. The air didn't just smell of hay, it was the ghost of last summer's hay, a sweet, dusty memory trapped in the cold. And the wind, that relentless Wyoming wind, didn't just blow through the empty stable, it played it. It whistled a low, mournful note through a gap in the clapboard, a sound that was less like wind and more like the place itself was sighing. This was the chore he hated most, the one she had loved best. Inside, the silence was a physical thing, thick and dusty, broken only by the scuttle of a field mouse in the loft. The stalls were all empty, their gates yawning open. All but one. At the far end, a shape shifted in, the deep shadow. A puff of warm, grassy breath clouded in a sliver of weak morning light cutting through a high window. He didn't want to look. He busied himself with the feed sack, the rustle of the grain overly loud in the quiet. He focused on the mundane mechanics of the task. Scoop, dump. The rhythm was a shield, but his peripheral vision betrayed him. He could see the outline, the delicate arch of a neck, the dark, liquid eye watching him from the gloom. He finished. With the other, imaginary horses in the empty stalls, a pointless pantomime. Finally, there was nothing left to do but turn towards the last occupant. He approached the stall slowly, his boots heavy on the packed earth. The foal was her foal. Born 2 days after the car skidded on black ice. 2 days after the world ended. A final cruel joke. A life for a life. But the math was all wrong. The horse wasn't a horse yet. It was all legs and knobby knees, a bay coat still fuzzy like a plush toy. It should have been skittish, bouncing off the walls. But it wasn't. It just stood there, in the exact center of its confinement, as if it too understood the fundamental wrongness of its existence. It didn't startle as he unlatched the gate. It just turned its head, and those enormous dark eyes pinned him in place. They weren't vacant. They were deep and old, and they held a quiet, unbearable knowing. He pushed the gate open and stepped. Inside, his body tense, expecting a flight that never came. The foal's ears were radar dishes, swiveling, taking in the creak of the hinge, the shuffle of his feet, the ragged sound of his own breathing. It took a single, hesitant step back, its hooves making soft thuds in the bedding. Then it stilled. Its nostrils flared, drinking in his scent. The smell of cold wool, of coffee, of grief. He knelt, not to get closer, but because his legs wouldn't hold him up anymore. He pretended to check the water bucket, running a finger through the unfrozen surface. The foal watched. He could feel the heat coming off its small body. He could hear the steady, rhythmic pull and push of its breath. It was the only calm sound in the universe. He didn't know why he did it. It was a stupid, dangerous thing. He let his hand, the one not in the water, rest on his knee, palm up, empty, an offering. He didn't look at the foal. He looked at the wall of the stall, at a knot in the wood that looked like an eye, and he held his breath. For a long minute, nothing. Just the wind's lament outside and the thud of his own heart in his ears. Then, a shift in the air. A soft, whiskery sniff against his sleeve. He didn't move, didn't twitch a muscle. The sniffing moved up his arm, a curious, gentle investigation. Then the warm, soft puff of its breath was on his bare wrist. It was an electric feeling, a jolt of pure life against his numb skin. He slowly turned his head. The foal's nose was inches from his own, its whiskers tickling his knuckles. It wasn't afraid. It was considering. Its eyes, so close now, were bottomless. He saw the long, baby-soft lashes, a tiny scratch on its muzzle, the perfect symmetry of the white star on its forehead. Her star. She'd named him for it. Polaris. A sound escaped him then, not a sob, but a ragged, broken exhale he hadn't known he was holding. At the sound, the foal didn't retreat. Instead, it dipped its head lower, and with an incredible, heart-stopping gentleness, it rested the warm, solid weight of its jaw right in his open palm. It wasn't a nuzzle for food. It was a resting, a trust. It held its head there, its eye half closed, as if his trembling hand was the only solid anchor in the whole spinning world. He sat there, frozen in the icy stable, for what felt like a lifetime, the heat from this small, motherless creature seeping into his frozen bones. The weight in his hand was a question he didn't know how to answer. When his knees began to ache with the cold from the ground, he moved ever so slowly to rise. The foal lifted its head, releasing his hand. He backed out of the stall, his movements clumsy, his heart a wild, confused drum against his ribs. He latched the gate, the click of the metal a period at the end of a sentence he hadn't finished. He turned to walk away, to retreat to the silent, suffocating house. He told himself it was just an animal, a simple, dumb beast that didn't know any better. He took 3 steps, then 4, the hollow sound of his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't know why he paused at the stable door, why he glanced back one last time into the shadowed gloom. But when he did, he saw it. The foal wasn't standing in the center of its stall anymore. It had come to the gate. It had pushed its nose between the iron bars, and it was watching him leave. And as he stood there, trapped in that silent, aching gaze, the foal took a single, hesitant step forward, its shoulder pressing against the gate. It wasn't a demand. It was a quiet, undeniable following, a silent plea from the darkness, asking a question he was too afraid to hear. The days after that first touch in the stable didn't soften the world. The cold deepened, and the silence in the house grew a new, different kind of teeth. He found himself listening for a sound that wasn't the wind. He'd catch himself staring out the kitchen window, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, his gaze fixed not on the mountains, but on the path to the stable. It was a gravitational pull, faint but persistent, a thread tied around a stone in his chest, tugging him toward that shadowy stall. He went through the motions, scoop, dump, water. But the motions had changed. They were slower. He'd linger, leaning against the stall gate, watching the foal, Polaris, nose through the oats. The animal was gaining strength, a precarious scaffolding of bone and sinew slowly fleshing out. But its stillness remained. It didn't frolic. It observed. Its ears would track the flight of a sparrow in the rafters with a deep, unnerving focus, as if deciphering a secret language. And it watched him. Always. Its dark eyes followed him from the moment the stable door groaned open until it creaked shut. It was a quiet, patient surveillance. It wasn't begging for treats or attention. It was waiting. Sometimes he'd murmur things, not to the foal, but to the silence, because the silence was worse. He'd talk about the weather, the price of feed, the damn field mouse that was getting fat on spilled grain. He never said her name. Sarah. The word was a landmine buried in the frozen ground of his heart. One afternoon, a week after the first touch, a squall blew in without warning. It wasn't snow, just a brutal horizontal rain that iced everything it touched. The wind screamed now. It didn't sigh, ripping at the roof of the stable. Inside, the world was reduced to the drumming on the tin roof and the frantic dance of shadows from the single swinging bulb he'd turned on. Polaris was agitated, not panicked, but intensely alert. It paced the perimeter of its stall, its hooves making soft, urgent thumps in the straw. Its head was high, its nostrils flared wide, sampling the charged air. It would stop, look at the rattling door, then look directly at him, its expression unreadable but deeply serious. He stood in the center aisle, feeling useless. "It's just a storm," he said, his voice sounding thin and foolish against the roar. The foal stopped its pacing and stared at him. And then it did something strange. It walked deliberately to the back of its stall, to a corner piled with old, clean straw, and it began to nose at something half buried there. It wasn't a random rootling. It was purposeful. It nudged a worn leather tack trunk that had been Sarah's, pushed up against the wall. The foal hooked its nose under the lid, trying to lift it. It was an impossible task, but the intent was clear. It wanted something inside. A cold that had nothing to do with the storm seeped into him. "What are you doing?" he whispered. He unlatched the gate and stepped inside. The foal backed away from the trunk, giving him space, but its attention remained fixed on it. Its eyes flicked from the trunk to his face, a silent, insistent demand. His hands were trembling. He hadn't opened it. He couldn't. It was hers. The last of her things in the house had been packed away, donated. But out here, in her domain, this trunk remained. A sealed tomb of the person she was out here, with the horses. He knelt in the straw. The simple brass latch felt cold under his thumb. He looked back at Polaris. The foal stood utterly still, its entire being focused on that moment, the storm forgotten. It gave a single soft nicker, a sound he'd never heard it make before. Not a demand, an encouragement. He lifted the lid. The smell that rose from inside was her. Saddle soap, leather, and the faint, ghostly trace of her perfume, the one she wore even for mucking out stalls because she said it made the roses jealous. It was a physical blow. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it was too late. On top was not what he expected. Not bridles or brushes. It was a faded flannel shirt, the blue and black check she'd always stolen from him. Folded neatly atop it was a small, paper-backed book, a journal. He knew without opening it what it was, her pregnancy journal. She'd written in it every night, she'd said, talking to the baby. Their baby, the one they never got to meet. He didn't read it. He couldn't. Just holding the cheap, spiral-bound notebook felt like holding a live wire. But beneath it, something else caught the light. A photograph tucked into the side. He pulled it out. It was her, taken just a week before the accident. She was standing in this very stall, beaming, her hand resting on the swollen side of the mare. Her face, alight with a joy so pure it was like a physical light source. She was looking at the mare, but she was seeing the future. Their future. The dam broke. It wasn't a sob. It was a silent, seismic rupture. His shoulders crumpled. He folded over the open trunk, the photograph pressed against his chest, his entire body shaking with the force of a grief he had kept locked in a deep freeze for months. He cried for her. He cried for the child. He cried for the crushing, unbearable silence of the house. He cried until he was empty, until there was nothing left but a hollow, aching shell, kneeling in the straw of a cold stable. He didn't know how long he was there. The storm raged on, but he was no longer in it. He was in a void of his own making, and then he felt it. A warmth along his side. A gentle, steady pressure. He opened his swollen eyes. Polaris had not fled from the storm of his grief. The foal had come closer. It had lain down in the straw beside him, its long legs tucked underneath. It was pressed against his side, its body a solid, warm wall in the cold. Its head was turned, and it was breathing, slow and deep, its warm, grassy breath washing over, his arm in a calm, rhythmic tide. It wasn't trying to stop his tears. It was simply staying, witnessing, bearing the weight of his silence with its own. He leaned into that warmth, into the simple, animal solidity of it. The tremors in his body began to still. The frantic drumming of his heart slowed to match the foal's steady, quiet rhythm. He wasn't alone in the dark. Something was staying with him in the wreckage. Weeks later, the first real thaw came. Drips from the roof replaced the howling wind. He was in the paddock, the morning sun weak, but hopeful on his face. Polaris, taller now, his coat sleek, was exploring the perimeter, sniffing at the mud, at the first brave blades of green grass fighting through the brown. He watched him, this creature that was a living, breathing monument to everything he'd lost. But the monument didn't feel like a tombstone anymore. It felt like a bridge. Polaris trotted over to him, not for food, but for contact. He shoved his nose against his chest, a firm, friendly bump. He laughed, a rough, unfamiliar sound that startled them both. He scratched the base of the foal's neck, right where he liked it, and Polaris stretched his head out, his upper lip wiggling in bliss. And then the foal did it again. He turned and walked away, not to explore, but to a specific spot near the fence post where the snow had melted first. He lowered his head and nosed at the ground. Then he looked back at him and gave that same soft, insistent nicker. He walked over. There, nestled in the wet earth, was a single, weathered piece of sea glass, a soft, foggy blue. It was utterly out of place. They were hundreds of miles from any ocean. Sarah had collected them, She kept them in a jar on the kitchen windowsill. Little pieces of a different world. He must have dropped one out here last summer. He bent and picked it up. It was cool and smooth in his palm, worn by a distant sea to a perfect, harmless thing. He looked from the sea glass in his hand to the foal, who was now watching him with what could only be described as quiet satisfaction. This creature who had led him to her journal in the storm had now led him to this. A small blue piece of a happy memory, not a sad one. A gift, a signpost. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about what the world and time and love could smooth out, could polish, until what was left wasn't a sharp edge, but something you could hold, something you could carry without it cutting you. He closed his fingers around the cool, smooth glass and looked out at the waking world. The silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was full of potential, waiting for a new sound, a new story to be written into it. Sometimes, the ones who carry you through the long, dark night are the ones who arrive after the light has gone out, who find you in the rubble and simply lie down beside you, breathing until you remember how to do it for yourself. If this story found a place in your heart, if you felt that breath in the silence, then you know these moments are why we keep going. Don't miss the next story that might just change everything. Subscribe, leave a comment about what you would have done, and press the bell so you can be right here, ready for the next journey, tomorrow.